started with a single missing person report. A young woman named Rachel McCready, 24, who vanished while driving home through a stretch of road known locally as the Switchbacks. Her mother said she was on the phone with her when it happened. The call ended mid-sentence, a sharp noise in the background, and then silence. When state troopers went looking, they found her car pulled over at the edge of the Forest Keys, still in the ignition. Driver's door open, headlights on. The strange part was the footprints. They led into the woods. Dozens of them. Not just Rachel's, but several others barefoot, larger, heavier. The tracks stopped abruptly near a dry creek bed where the mud had been disturbed, as if something heavy had been dragged through. Deputy Paul Harris was the first on scene. He'd worked small, missing cases before, runaways, lost hikers, but something about this one felt wrong. The silence in those woods wasn't natural. No birds, no crickets, just a low hum that seemed to hang in the air. He followed the trail for half a mile before he saw it, an old hunting cabin tucked deep behind the pines. Its windows dark, a chimney puffing thin smoke. He radioed it in. The dispatcher told him to wait for backup. But Paul didn't wait. He approached slowly, gun drawn, mud sucking at his boots. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, the frame chewed up by azure, maybe by something else. Inside, the smell hit him first. Not rot, exactly, but iron, thick and sweet. He flicked on his flashlight and saw piles of bones in the corners, some animal, some not. And on the far wall, written in something dark and sticky, were 3 words. They eat noise. He stumbled back, breath shaking, and tripped over a pile of rags. Only they weren't rags. They were clothes. Torn, stiff with blood, still warm. He bolted outside, radio buzzing with static, shouting for anyone to respond, but all he heard was his own voice echoing back through the trees. When backup finally arrived, 2 hours later, the cabin was gone. No smoke, no bones, no blood, just flattened earth and a few scattered nails. The report was quietly filed as inconclusive. Paul Harris tried to push it out of his mind, but he couldn't. The woods stayed with him. He stopped sleeping, stopped talking much, and eventually quit the force. People said he went up north to live with his brother. Others said he never really left those woods. Years later, another case hit the same stretch of road, then another. And every time, the pattern was the same: vehicles found abandoned near the tree line, personal belongings left behind, and tracks that led into the forest and disappeared. The county sent search parties, but they never found anything beyond torn clothing and half-buried remains of campfires. By the time journalist Caleb Wren started investigating, most locals wouldn't even talk about it. The few who did spoke in fragments about a family that lived beyond the ridges, about the ones who never came down. They called them the Barkers, the Reeds, the Duncans. It changed with whoever was talking, but one name came up more than once: the CRA, WFORDS. No records of them existed. No property deeds, no census entries, nothing. Just stories. One old hunter swore he'd seen their fires flickering across the valley in winter. Tiny orange eyes, he called them. Another said he'd found a trap filled with small animal bones arranged like teeth. Caleb was drawn to it the way some people are drawn to cliffs. The closer he got, the more he felt that pull. He arrived in the small town of Raven Hollow with a recorder, a notebook, and a rented Jeep. The sheriff's department didn't want to talk. He was told the cases were cold and classified. When he pressed, the sheriff, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, said, "You're not from around here, are you, son? Then leave it that way." That night, Caleb sat in his motel room replaying an old interview he'd found, an audio clip from a retired trooper. Anonymous, recorded in the late 90s. The voice was distorted, but the fear underneath was real. "They told us not to dig too deep. Said some families were better left alone. When we found the site, there were bones. Too many for one person. and they weren't buried. They were displayed. Caleb listened, again and again. In the background, beneath the trooper's voice, he could hear faint sounds, breathing, and something else, like a whisper. The next morning, he drove out toward the switchbacks. The road wound between cliffs, narrow and slick with morning fog. Every few miles, he passed rusted mailboxes, their names long faded. Then, he saw some figure standing beside the road, motionless, wearing a tattered flannel shirt. He slowed, rolled down the window. "Hey, you okay?" The figure turned. The face was pale, slack eyes unfocused. The man just stood there, head tilting slightly, as Caleb's car idled. Then, without warning, he opened his mouth and screamed. But it wasn't a scream of pain. It was high, guttural, almost animal. Caleb floored the gas and didn't look back. When he stopped, an hour later, his phone had no signal, and his rear bumper was smeared with something dark. He took photos, wrote everything down, but when he tried to call the local station, the line cut off halfway through his first sentence. Static filled the air. Then a voice, low, slow, deliberate. "Turn around. Leave it be." Caleb froze. He hadn't said where he was. That night, he parked near the ridge overlooking the valley. From up there, you could see miles of forest. The trees looked endless, black veins under a gray sky. As dusk fell, he spotted faint lights moving in the distance, 5, maybe 6, flickering through the pines in a slow, deliberate pattern. He lifted his camera, zoomed in. The lights weren't fires. They were lanterns, moving in a perfect circle, and in the center of that circle, something else glowed, something larger, pulsing faintly like it was breathing. He lowered the camera, heart hammering, but when he looked again, the lights were gone. Only darkness remained. The next morning, Caleb woke to the sound of his car alarm. He stumbled out of the motel room barefoot, heart pounding, and saw his Jeep in the parking lot driver's door hanging open. Everything inside was scattered, camera bag on the ground, papers soaked in dew, the recorder missing. He stood there in the pale morning light, breath steaming, trying to process what he was looking at. The only thing left untouched was a small envelope wedged under the windshield wiper. No markings, just one thing written on the back, in crooked block letters: "Stop looking." Caleb looked around the lot, empty. A delivery truck rolled past on the highway and kept going. He tore the envelope open with shaking hands. Inside was a single Polaroid. The photo was of him, sleeping, in the motel bed. He left Raven Hollow before sunrise, but he didn't go home. He couldn't. Something in him had already crossed the point of no return. The road toward the ridges was little more than gravel and broken asphalt, cutting deeper into the forest than any GPS dared mark. The radio went dead within minutes. The trees thickened around him, swallowing the road in shade, even though the sun was high. He drove until the road became dirt, then until the dirt became roots. Finally, the Jeep refused to go any farther. He got out, grabbed his pack, and followed what looked like an old footpath barely visible, but deliberate. There were symbols carved into the trees along the way, crosses, spirals, small crude faces. Every few yards, the air grew heavier, thicker. At some point, he noticed the forest had gone completely silent again. No birds, no insects. Just the sound of his boots on the damp ground and his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. After what felt like an hour, the path opened into a clearing, and there it was, an entire settlement, cabins, dozens of them, all in various states of collapse, their roofs caved in, windows black. Old clothes hung from lines between trees, stiff from weather and age. Animal skulls dangled from branches on thin wire. A well stood in the center of the clearing, its stone rim slick with moss. Caleb raised his camera and started taking photos, hands trembling. The air smelled of wet earth and something faintly metallic. Every instinct told him to leave, but his curiosity burned hotter than fear. He approached one of the cabins and peeked inside. The floor was covered in bones, not just scattered arranged. Each femur, rib, and vertebra placed with eerie precision, forming spiraling patterns that radiated outward from the center of the room. And at the center, a single jawbone, upright, like an altar. He backed out slowly. Behind him, the woods creaked. He turned the camera toward the sound and froze. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, tall, thin, barefoot. The skin on its face was slack, pale, stretched too tight over bone. Its eyes caught the light and reflected white like an animal's. "Hello," Caleb's voice cracked. The figure didn't move. It just stared. Then, in one slow, jerking motion, it raised its hand and pointed toward the well. Caleb's pulse thundered. He took a step back. The figure tilted its head, and from somewhere behind it came another sound, soft at first, then louder, whispers. Dozens of them. He turned, scanning the tree line. Shadows shifted between trunks, quick and deliberate. He grabbed his flashlight, swung the beam across the clearing. The light caught movement everywhere, faces half hidden, bodies crouched low, eyes glinting. They were surrounding him. He bolted for the path he came from, lungs burning, camera clattering against his chest. The whispers turned into laughter, high, breathless, echoing through the trees. His foot caught on a root, and he fell hard, mud splashing into his mouth. He spat, scrambled up, and kept running. He didn't stop until the forest opened again, and the road appeared. The Jeep was still there. He jumped inside, slammed the door, locked it. His hands shook as he fumbled with the ignition. The engine groaned but wouldn't catch. Then he saw movement in the rearview mirror. Someone or something was standing just behind the car. He turned, heart hammering. Nothing there. Just fog curling around the bumper. But when he looked back at the mirror again, there was a handprint on the back window. Fresh, wet dot. The engine roared to life. He tore out of there, gravel spitting from under the tires. He didn't look back until he hit the main highway. When he did, he wished he hadn't. There were figures standing at the tree line, dozens of them, watching as he sped away, all motionless, all silent. He made it back to town by afternoon, parked outside the sheriff's office, and stumbled inside covered in mud and shaking. The deputies stared as he tried to explain what he'd seen. When he mentioned the settlement, the well, the bones, the sheriff's expression hardened. "You didn't see what you think you saw," he said quietly. Caleb's voice rose. "I have pictures. There's a whole colony out there." The sheriff stood, hand resting on his belt. "Listen to me, son. Some places, the law don't go. Not anymore. We tried. We lost good men doing it." Caleb stared at him. "You're telling me you know about them?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. "I'm telling you to forget it." When Caleb pressed, the man leaned closer. "Those folks out there, they ain't right. Been that way for generations. They live by a code older than any badge, and they don't take kindly to being found." Caleb shook his head. "You're protecting them." The sheriff's eyes flickered with something like guilt. "Protecting you?" He left the station in a daze. That night, he locked himself in his room, replaying the photos he'd taken. Most were blurry, but one image stood out: the clearing with the well. In the bottom corner of the frame, reflected in the water, was a face. His face, only he hadn't been near the well when he took it. The next morning, his camera was gone. His car too. The motel manager said two men in uniform had picked them up during the nights, said Caleb had requested it himself. Only Caleb hadn't. He tried to check out, but the clerk handed him a note left at the front desk. It was written in the same crooked handwriting as the first envelope. "The Crawfords, remember?" He burned the note in the motel sink and left before sunrise. But when he stopped for gas, 20 miles out, he noticed something carved into his back bumper. 3 small crosses, perfectly straight, Caleb didn't plan to go back. He told himself that 100 times, but by the third night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the well, the reflection, his own face staring back. He told himself it was unfinished work, that he needed evidence, proof. But in truth, he needed to understand. He drove back toward the mountains at dusk, headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the fog. The radio was silent, again no music, no static, just a low hum that seemed to vibrate in his chest. When he passed the faded sign for Raven Hollow, he felt that same pull he'd felt the first time, like gravity bending sideways. The road narrowed until it was barely wide enough for the Jeep. The trees leaned close, branches clawing the roof. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard water, or maybe breathing. By midnight, he was back at the edge of the clearing. The settlement was different now. Cleaner. The bones were gone. The cabins looked almost lived in. He saw faint candlelight in the windows, smelled smoke, heard the faint hum of voices. He crouched low, heart pounding. He was watching a family dinner. Dozens of them sat around a massive table built from uneven boards. Men, women, children, all pale, thin, their faces stretched tight with the same uncanny stillness. They didn't speak. They only looked at each other. Then at something at the head of the table, a woman with white hair and eyes that didn't reflect light. She raised her hands, and all at once, the others began to hum in unison. The sound wasn't music. It was vibration, a deep bone-level resonance that made Caleb's vision flicker. He felt it in his teeth, in his skull. The ground beneath him trembled, just slightly, as though the earth itself were responding. He pulled out his recorder and hit record. Static hissed, then the hum overtook it. He whispered, "This is Caleb Wren, October 19th. I've found them." Something shifted behind him. He turned, flashlight jerking through the dark, and caught a glimpse of a face inches from his own gray skin, teeth too sharp, eyes milky and wide. He screamed, stumbled backward, tripped over a route. The figure didn't move. It just stared, expression blank, as the hum from the clearing grew louder. Caleb crawled to his feet and ran. Branches tore at his clothes, roots caught his boots, but he didn't stop. The forest seemed to twist around him, the paths folding into each other until he couldn't tell which way was out. Every few seconds, he caught flashes between the trees' faces, flickers of movement, hands brushing bark. When he finally broke through the tree line, dawn was rising. His Jeep was still there. He dove in, slammed the door, and gunned the engine. He drove for hours without stopping. When he finally reached the highway, he looked in the mirror and saw himself, mud-caked, wild-eyed. But there was something wrong. His reflection wasn't moving the same way he was. For a split second, it smiled. He pulled over, breathing hard, and forced himself to look again. Nothing. Just his own pale, shaking face. He got back to the city 2 days later. Turned in the photos, the recordings, his written notes, all of it, to a contact at a small, independent paper. The editor promised to review them. A week passed, then 2. Then he got a call. "We checked your files," the editor said. "There's nothing on them. Every drive's blank." Caleb laughed, but it came out hollow. "That's impossible. I don't know what game you're playing," the editor interrupted, "but don't call this office again." The line went dead. That night, Caleb went through his backups, desperate. All gone. Every folder empty except an audio file he didn't remember recording. He pressed play. The hum filled the room. Then his voice whispering words he couldn't remember saying. "They eat noise. They eat what listens." The lights flickered. He slammed the laptop shut and sat there in the dark, shaking. The hum didn't stop. It wasn't coming from the computer anymore. It was coming from the walls, the floor, the air. He grabbed his keys and left, drove aimlessly through the city until sunrise, trying to outpace the sound. When he finally stopped, he realized he was on the outskirts again. No city lights, no cell signal, just open fields, rolling fog, and the outline of mountains far in the distance. Something about the landscape felt wrong. Familiar. He got out of the car. The ground was soft beneath his shoes, like the forest floor. The fog thickened, curling around him. Then, faintly, he saw lights moving ahead. Lanterns. He walked toward them without thinking. When he reached the clearing, it was empty. No cabins, no well, just wild grass and wind. He turned in circles, disoriented. Then he saw it half buried in the soil. His own recorder, the same one he'd lost weeks ago. He picked it up. The red light was still blinking. He pressed play. His voice whispered through static. "This is Caleb Wren, October 19th. I've found them." The hum rose beneath it. Then, softer, another voice joined in. The same woman from the dinner table. "And now, they've found you." The recorder clicked off. Caleb turned, breath ragged, but the fog had thickened to white. He couldn't see the car anymore. Couldn't see anything at all. Only shapes. Pale, human, moving closer. He ran until his lungs burned, until his body gave out, and the last thing he heard before the fog swallowed him was the low, rhythmic hum of the Crawfords. Days later, the Jeep was found parked along the highway. Doors locked. Keys inside. No sign of struggle. The police filed it under voluntary disappearance. The sheriff never spoke of it again. Locals still talk about a man who came asking questions and never left. Sometimes hikers claim they hear recordings playing faintly in the woods, muffled voices, a hum beneath them, repeating the same sentence over and over. They eat noise. They eat what listens. And when they go to look for the source, the forest goes silent. Asterisk, if you ever find yourself driving through the mountain corridors of Appalachia and your radio slips into silence, don't tap the dial. Don't lean in. Just keep driving, because sometimes silence isn't empty, it's listening back. If this story stayed with you tonight, share it with someone who still believes every mystery has a witness. There are more files sealed in those county archives, more names that vanished off the grid, and more towns where the map thins out into rumor. Follow, listen, and stay close to the road. The next story might start with a sound you recognize right before it disappears.